Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I'm Chris Clements.
And today we're going to lead with, the day is, this weekend is the opening weekend of the new movie called Reagan. Let's see if everyone can see that. So if you're on the video, you can see I'm wearing...
Unfortunately, I didn't get the memo. I do have a Reagan Bush shirt, but it's old.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if it even fit anymore.
This one is not old.
Okay.
Because I went to put on one that was old.
Are there any Reagan 2024 shirts? Because that would be appropriate.
Well, I have a Reagan 2024 movie yard sign in my yard.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I did see sort of a meme picture of Dennis Quaid as Ronald Reagan, and it said, tan, rested, and ready, Reagan 2024. And I thought, I need to get a handle of something like that. Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah. I don't have, unfortunately, and for those watching the video, you're going to see this picture. I have a picture from 1984. This was our family photo as a family, and the entire family, well, all the kids, are wearing their Reagan 1984 shirt.
Yeah.
It was 1984 because my mom was a huge Reagan fan. I'll show you this picture. The people watching it will see that.
Oh, my goodness.
And the funny thing is I think of all 6 kids.
Nobody can really see that.
Well, they're going to put it up.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm putting it up as well. I can zoom in on that. Yeah. So
the funny thing is that I'm the only one of the 6 kids that would proudly wear that shirt today.
Really?
Yeah.
That is sad.
It's sad. Sorry, siblings.
That
throw
sad.
you under the bus. But
well, I mean, we grew up in that era, and you hosted a premiere the other night for American Encore, and it kind of was the who's who of conservative politics in the state of Arizona there the other night. It was nice.
It was
Governor
a nice turnout.
Ducey showed up, and some other
Sheriff Mark Lamb.
Yeah, some other luminaries.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being there.
Yeah,
it was legislators.
Rachel Mitchell, our
Rachel
county
Mitchell, who needs to win.
Yeah, and a number of people who were invited and couldn't make it for various reasons. All very big supporters of.
Carrie Lake wasn't there. I was surprised.
I was not surprised. So
I'm sorry. I just had to throw that in there.
The movie. So I saw the movie in its rough cut form about 3 months ago.
Okay, yeah.
And to see it done was awesome. And I remember after I watched it the first time, there was like, oh, I should have had this, should have had that. And then in the interim, I learned that the movie is based on a book by Paul Kenger, which was The Crusader. And it's all about Reagan and the fall of communism. So that made more sense to me about how much they focused on the issues, because there's so much of Reagan that you could go into. And I was like, why didn't they play his final address from the Oval Office? Anyway, the point is that the culmination of this movie really was him standing at the wall.
Yes.
At Brandenburg Gate saying, tear down this wall.
Yes.
And
which they did a really great job. First of all, the acting was surprisingly really good, and I didn't know how Dennis Quaid would play it per se. He is my doppelganger, by the way. I am compared to Dennis Quaid on occasion. I'll say I'm very proud of that.
Apparently I look or am somewhat like a dude that hosted The Bachelor. I don't remember. Yeah. My sister claims it, but I can't remember who the guy's name is.
The acting was very good. The storytelling was a little bit all over the board, but the 2 focus points, one being when Reagan was head of the Screen Actors Guild and saw the influx and infiltration of the Soviets and Communist Party full force within the unions, and stood up against that in Hollywood, and then gradually we make it to his stand against the Soviets as president. There's the middle part in there that I thought could have been condensed. And when you see the movie, you'll understand.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You know, based on the fact that Ken Gore's book was really focused on that his rise, his beating the Soviets without firing a shot, which is what I told my kids this morning. I thought that middle part where they focus a little bit on his governorship and they focus on his run against Ford. Nobody really remembers that.
And I found that fascinating.
I found it fascinating
because I think what people don't remember.
If you're a fan of Gerald Ford,
close.
you didn't find it fascinating.
Well, but you think about it. I mean, I had forgotten.
They don't paint him in a great light.
I had forgotten how close. I mean, this was on the floor at the convention.
A contested convention.
Yeah. And it, I mean, it went right down to Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
I mean, that was amazing.
From a historical perspective, that was really great.
I mean, it's probably one of the closest the closest nominations we've seen in modern history.
Yeah, and he was dejected after that. He didn't think he would ever do it again, but God had other plans.
Yeah,
which
I loved.
The faith part, I appreciated.
Yeah,
running right through the middle of the movie.
Exactly, and I loved that there was this meeting with a very young Pat Boone, and then this old preacher who prayed and basically, said, I see you at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Who was played
Pat Boone?
By Pat Boone.
Yeah. And
only if you're like old as we are would you catch something like that.
Well, I love Pat Boone. Pat Boone has been an icon for generations. I like his music. I can't say I love his music.
Do you really?
I like his music. But I love him.
I was really happy he was still alive.
I was too. I didn't know for a while. I haven't seen him for a while. But he has been. When I was doing stuff with Cokes nationally, he was a key part of the way that we had messaged to older women.
Oh,
because you could send a voicemail to a woman over the age of 65, and they would do whatever he asked. You vote for this person, okay, Mr. Boone.
Yeah,
because they all loved him.
No, that was the faith part of Ronald Reagan was such a huge part of his life because of his mom,
right?
And that ran right through the center of the movie, which I really appreciated.
And one of my favorite scenes in the movie is following him getting shot. He's in the hospital, and Tip O'Neill comes, holding the rosary. Yeah. He's praying for him as he's waiting for Ronald Reagan to wake up, and that happened. I mean, can you imagine Hakeem Jeffries going to Trump's bedside?
Oh, if he's
or Nancy
speaker?
Pelosi when Trump was president. Nancy Pelosi. I mean, it's just it does draw into stark contrast how divisive our politics are today, more than ever before. And I guess how personal it is, because they were very divisive.
Yes.
I mean, this movie did a pretty good job. One of the complaints that Alyssa had was the interlude of how much Reagan was hated by the left. They had the song and they played a bunch of clips.
Oh, they had the song by Genesis.
Yeah. And
Land of Confusion.
Right,
I hadn't heard that song in so long.
But I understand that as a point, because I think people needed to be reminded that he was reviled.
Oh, yes.
By the left.
Well, and also the reminder that so much of what was orchestrated against him was paid for, bought and paid for by outside interests.
Yeah.
Just like we're seeing today.
We are today. Yeah. Well, and the other thing was
and yet he won in a landslide.
Yeah. That was
Not just a landslide we may never see again.
Right. 49 states.
Yeah.
In 1984.
Losing Minnesota.
Right.
Which is a lost cause, as we're seeing right now.
Only because Mondale was from Minnesota. It was his favorite son. But the thing that's interesting is Alyssa was like, I don't really get the whole joke from the debate about I'm not going to hold my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. And I said, you just had to have been there to see how much they were leaning in on Reagan being old and losing his mind.
Yeah.
Huh. Have we seen that playbook?
Maybe.
But
just a little bit.
The comparisons are, I mean, Reagan was a spring chicken compared to what Biden's been.
Yes,
been
and Joe Biden's Alzheimer's, as to your point, many times had already set in before the last election.
Well, probably
in a very pronounced way. And we're seeing the results of that now.
There is a little bit of
he's still on the beach.
There is a bit of karma. There's a bit of karma,
sure,
for the Democrats who were assailing Reagan for being old and forgetful. Because boy, that chicken came home to roost in a big way for them, right? But yeah, that was that debate line was classic.
that helped win him the election and assured people that he was there. He was there
because he
still
had
it.
Wit.
Because the first debate, which they did a good job. I mean, he did not have a good first debate, and people forget you're running the country too.
Yeah, right.
and so for presidents, those first debates are always tough.
And it's
now was it demonstrably as stark as what happened to Joe Biden?
Well, no. But
no,
that
but
was
they weren't.
unexpected.
But also his handlers weren't trying to get rid of him like Joe Biden's were. I mean, the only reason Joe Biden did that debate, ladies and gentlemen, is because they were ready to toss him to the curb, and they had a plan to do it.
Well, so well,
but, what was your favorite part of the movie? Like, what was the part that really got you?
That's a good question. I think it has to be when he's at Brandenburg Gate.
Yeah.
I mean, it just...
Did you cry?
I did.
I did. Yeah.
I'm about to cry again.
Yeah, I did. What I walked away from and what I told, and I brought my son Preston, and he asked me, what did you like the most? I said, Preston, I lived through it. We lived through all that.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting any younger. But Ronald Reagan was the most consequential president of my lifetime. Every president since has wanted to be Ronald Reagan. Every single one of them.
Yeah, whether they want to admit it or not.
And regardless of what people's affinity or love is for Donald Trump or on the left for Barack Obama, there will never be another Ronald Reagan.
No.
He won, and what the movie does a great job, which is why you should go see it, is the argument that we as conservatives have made for many years is that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot. And he did it because by following his instincts and his understandings of communism, having studied it for many decades. And he did it in a way still with humor and with grace, which is captured, I think, very well in his overtures to Gorbachev. At the same time with strength. In Iceland, Reykjavik, walking away from negotiations. And I thought the dynamic that they showed between he and George Shultz was great.
Yeah.
George Shultz was a pain in the ass.
Yeah. No, that was absolutely it's just spot on.
So Shultz was like, what are you doing? He's like, just hold on there, George.
Right. Well, and
I know what's happening. I know these people.
The thing that I go back to that I've put a lot of thought into over the last week is there's a lot of people in the MAGA movement who dismiss Reagan.
Yeah,
you can't go back, and it's like, look, we can't ignore what Reagan did. We can't ignore the roadmap he provided. And to dismiss him, we do that at our own peril.
Oh, absolutely.
Because he is critically important to this nation. And one of the things there's a really interesting quote, I thought, from Peggy Noonan. Oh, that was another thing. I was like, where was Peggy Noonan in this movie? But
she wasn't in the movie.
She was not one of the speechwriters dealing with the foreign policy stuff.
Yeah.
But Dana Rohrabacher had a prominent role, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah.
Because he is such an unconventional guy. For those that don't know, Dana Rohrabacher was a young, youth for Reagan as a high schooler when Reagan ran for governor, became Reagan's speechwriter in his governor's race or governorship, and went on to be a speechwriter in his presidency, and was part of the team that wrote the speech at Brandenburg Gate,
Yeah.
tear down this wall. And
And the movie does a fantastic job of showing the tension of what they want, what Reagan felt he needed to say, what they wanted him to say,
and Schultz saying you can't say
and
that.
Schultz saying you can't say that. We've made so much progress, you can't say that.
Right. Yeah, that was awesome. And Rohrabacher went on to be a longtime congressman.
Yeah.
From Huntington Beach, and I knew him because he was in Congress at the same time as Shattuck. But I remember he was doing a special election in 1999 in San Bernardino County, and I was over there working, and he came in to campaign.
This
with
is
the
back
candidate.
when California had Republicans.
Yeah.
There's still a couple
but
out there.
he came in to do a day of campaigning with the candidate, and he had just had rotator cuff surgery, and so he said, I need your help. I was like, I'm going to stand up against the wall, and I'm going to put my arm up, and I want you to push against my wrist, and I'm going to yell, and I'm going to scream, and I'm telling you to stop, but don't stop. You keep pushing. I have to do this. My physical therapist says I have to do this. So he gets up there. I start pushing on his arm. He's like, ah! And I lean. I let back. He's like, no, don't stop. It's like, I am literally killing.
I'm killing Dana
congressman.
Rohrabacher.
But
Security is going to be called.
yeah, my favorite quote from Dana Rohrabacher was from the mid 90s or early 90s. You remember when Bill Clinton was asked if he'd ever smoked marijuana? He said, yes, but I didn't inhale.
Yeah.
And Rohrabacher
Just
was
like,
asked,
the meaning of
did you
is,
ever
is.
inhale? He's like, inhale? I did everything but drink the bong water. He was a surfer, so he was definitely a pot
Well,
smoker.
and they kind of capture that when he's
Yeah.
camped out on the Reagan's lawn, right?
Right. So the movie was surprisingly good for a conservative movie. You know what I mean? You know?
I didn't know what to expect, and I'd read no reviews, which I typically don't when it comes to movies like this. Even like any of the reviews for Angel Studios, which is a prominent, Christ-centered, faith-centered movie studio. I don't read those reviews because the left of Hollywood typically pans everything, and I just don't. I just take a lot of stock in it. I think the storytelling from the Soviet perspective, the old Soviet KGB perspective, was an interesting way of going.
You know, it's funny you say that because Alyssa did not like that plot device.
Oh, she didn't.
I was a little bit thrown by it during when I saw it the first time, but after I understood what the movie's baseline was, which was the book Crusader, that then made more sense.
Sure.
So I think maybe if she watches it, she'll watch it again because I'm going to watch this thing probably.
Yeah. So, I mean, for
100 more
those
times.
listening, the movie takes the tack that the Soviets had a KGB agent assigned to Ronald Reagan for his entire career, going back to when he was an actor and an anti-communist.
Yeah. And just
And,
use that as like,
and
here's
if
the
that
story.
doesn't scare you, it should.
Yeah, right.
It
right.
really should.
Well,
Because who knows what they have going on here
Yeah,
today,
exactly.
or the
Well, we
Chinese
know
have
that they
going
do.
on here today.
They both the
You know.
Russians and the Chinese.
Yeah.
But here's something that Peggy Noonan quote. This goes to why I think Reagan is important to us today. And so this is what Peggy Noonan wrote after the Democrat convention. She said something else. The Democrat Party has more substantial characters of recent American history to parade around on stage. The Clintons, the Obamas, Jesse Jackson, who, whatever your view of him, was there on the balcony at the Lorraine Motel when Martin Luther King was shot. This conveyed a party with a storied past, and if you join it, you're joining something real. The Republican Party, in its great toppling, has rejected its past. You lose something when you cast your history aside and all you've got for prime time is Trump's sons.
Yeah.
I think that's well said because she makes the point that if, think about if why wasn't Michael Reagan on the stage?
Yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about communicating to a group of voters who Donald Trump desperately needs.
Yes.
And
I
I'll
agree
tell
with
you and it's because history has treated Reagan well. And I'll give you an example.
History has treated him so well. Democrats cite him
Right. Well,
in arguments against Republicans.
And this is where I'm going. 20 years ago, he passed away, June of 20 years ago, 2004. And if you recall, he laid in repose in the Capitol Rotunda for a couple of days. And you could go, get in line and go walk, around the casket. Now, because it was on the Hill, if you were a congressional staffer, you could cut the line and go and do it. And, I thought that was outrageous because I'm like, what, some young Democrat staffer who doesn't give a crap about who Reagan was.
Just wants to be seen.
He just wants to be seen.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go stand in line. So after work one day.
I'm going to be the contrarian.
Right. I got in line. It was probably about 9:00 at night.
Yeah.
And I stood in line all night long because it was a miles long line.
Yeah.
There were a couple women in line with me that were, I think they were right behind me, who worked for some lefty environmental group.
Oh.
And I said, I'm just really surprised that you're standing in line to honor Ronald Reagan, because I would think that you wouldn't have agreed with them. And they said, well, we probably didn't agree with him on some stuff, but he was such an amazing president. I mean, how do you not pay respects? Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's powerful. So
we have a mutual friend who used to work for a very dynamic and important Democratic senator, very iconic Democratic senator named Ted Kennedy. And our friend is named Robert Vera, and he was a staffer for Kennedy for many years. Mm-hmm. Kennedy loved Ronald Reagan, adored him. Didn't agree with him on almost anything, but he respected the role that he played in American history.
Yeah.
Same with Tip O'Neill.
Yeah.
And even Geraldine Ferrara, I remember a quote that she says, she goes, we lost because Ronald Reagan, I don't know the quote. She was at an event with the Teamsters, and most of the Teamsters were going to vote for Ronald Reagan. And then she understood that they were going to lose at that moment because Ronald Reagan had made a huge swath of the country believe in itself again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And constituencies that would not normally vote Republican.
Right.
And that's why he won that landslide.
Well, and I think that goes to what he talked about in his final speech. Because
your best hopes, not your best, not your fears.
He talked about the things that he cared about, and it was, making America feel like raising the American morale again.
His first slogan was "Make America Great Again."
Right, right.
So if anything,
that was 1980.
if Donald Trump would pay a little, this is a window for him to pay homage to the Reagan legacy. And if he were to do a little bit of that,
it'd go a long way.
It would go a long way.
Yeah. It's
to a huge swath of the
electorate. If nothing else, just
acknowledge it.
Acknowledge it, or take some of his lines. For example, this is from the final address in the Oval Office. Our spirit is back. We haven't reinstitutionalized it. We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare. It's fragile. It needs protection.
Yep.
You want to talk, Tim Walz talks about freedom in the Democrat convention, not understanding what freedom actually is, because he thinks freedom is delivered to you by the government.
Yes.
And what Reagan understood and taught all of us is a reinstitution of the founders saying, no, freedom comes from God. And it's to protect you from the government.
You are a Christian nationalist for saying that. Yeah. Do you know that?
Right.
If you actually believe, sir, that your freedoms come from the Almighty, there must be something wrong with you. That's what Tim Walz would.
And then he goes on to say, if we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. I'm warning of an eradication of that, of the American memory that could result ultimately in an erosion of the American spirit. Let's start with some basics. More attention to American history and greater emphasis on civic ritual. Let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.
Yep. Yeah. No, he was the greatest. He was the GOAT.
Yeah.
Whenever I post anything about Reagan, I always do a hashtag GOAT.
Yeah, and it's
greatest of all time.
And it was something. And this you pointed this out earlier, that he was in this fight against communism for freedom at the very beginning. For him, early in his life, and maybe not in college, but by the time he got to Hollywood and he started to see what was happening, and he gets elected vice president of SAG, he starts to recognize, wow, there's really an issue here.
Yeah.
And he goes on to become the president of SAG.
Yeah, McCarthy wasn't wrong. His tactics might have been questionable, but he wasn't wrong.
Well, but Reagan, and I thought this was I love that they put this in the film. When he testified before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, he said, look, I don't care if there's a communist party. There should be a communist party. We need to have an open and honest debate. I'm going to argue against them, but our Constitution, our democracy, our republic can withstand having a communist party, which I thought was fascinating, because that would have been heresy to McCarthy.
Yeah.
But Ronald Reagan knew the power of the ideas of freedom.
Yeah, that's true.
And then he went on to speak right before the Goldwater election, A Time for Choosing, where he talks about it's not an issue of right or left, it's up or down.
You can replay today.
Yeah.
You can replay almost at every election.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about this. Not too long ago, this comes from that speech.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are? I had some place to escape too."
Yeah.
It's like, in that sentence, he told us the entire story. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. That was in 1964.
Yeah. And it's true today.
Yeah. That was 60 years ago.
It's incredibly true today.
60 years ago, and it's more true now than it's ever been.
Yep. Because we are seeing the rise of socialism and communism in our body politic.
Yeah. And
it's tied to anti-Semitism. It's tied to everything that's going on college campuses. It's all bought. It's all paid for.
Well, what's disturbing to me is it's both sides, because you have the isolationist wing of the Republican Party that says no money for Ukraine, and the argument that I would make is, during the Reagan era, we spent billions and billions and billions to fight communism, and even beyond, right? Not just in the 1980s. This is a small payment to push back against the Russian regime, which is communist. Make no mistake about it. It may not be called Soviet
communist
anymore, but it's still communist. It's led by a Soviet.
Yeah, for sure.
Vladimir Putin is a Soviet. And yet we have people who call themselves Republicans saying we should abandon that effort and let Russia win. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I agree with that, but I would push back on one thing, and that is Ukraine is a completely corrupt and failed state, has been for a long time, and this money is being misspent, and it's being misused, and we've missed windows of opportunity to bring an end to this.
I don't disagree with that.
So that's the other part of it. It's like if we were spending this money and we had a Republican president that had an end game and a strategy, or any president, then I would say yes.
If we had a president.
If we had a president. We don't have a president. We have a guy on a beach right now. And I'm after everything that's gone on the last several weeks, I'm more convinced that the big punk is Barack Obama is absolutely running the country, and Joe Biden will resign the presidency within the month.
Yeah, you have said that before. That is very. I mean, look,
because Harris running as an incumbent, quote unquote, when she has not won one vote for anything.
Yeah, it is that
is a much more compelling imagery, which all they're running on right now is imagery and nothing.
Right.
It's even more compelling for them because their poll numbers will begin to slip over the next several weeks.
Well, it's so, but
anyway,
but
we
I
digress.
But it's really not a digression because
we don't have a president.
Because we don't have a functional presidency right now.
No,
and and it needs to change. And so we
13 soldiers were remembered at Arlington the other day, and neither the vice president or the president of the United States showed up for that ceremony. Donald Trump was invited. He goes, he lays a wreath. All those families, those Gold Star families, are absolutely thrilled that he's there, and the press makes a big deal that he's there. Why? They make
Saying
it
that he
they make
shouldn't
it
have been.
about Trump being there versus the other two not being there,
Well,
which is
right.
outrageous.
Right. Well,
They're
it's
the ones
so
who got
typical.
those people, those soldiers killed.
Yeah, but I mean, that's why they didn't show up. Who's going to admit that kind of screw up? But
apparently they haven't even visited with the families.
well, no, they're not going to.
It's disgusting.
It's because they don't have they don't have respect for our armed forces.
No, and they try to paint Trump as this guy who's the other suckers and losers. Which
Well,
he
yeah, I mean,
never
they
said.
try to make him the anti-military guy, which is absurd.
It's absolutely absurd.
So I do believe Kamala should be the president right now because we need a president, even though I don't think she'd do a very good job. At least we'd have one. But I also don't necessarily think that her ascending the presidency before the election is going to help her that much.
But remember, it's not about the person. It's about the machine. There are people out visiting with the press who are actually saying that, which I'm just flabbergasted.
It is flabbergasting.
It's not really about the person. It's about the machine. It's about the people around them.
Well, I mean, it's not
Well, then
untrue
would Barack
that-
Obama like to sit for an interview because we feel like he's the person pulling the strings behind the curtain?
It is true that personnel is policy, and what we have is Biden administration's chock full of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Barack Obama staffers.
Yeah, who want to tax you into oblivion. Oblivion. It'll really never get through. It's probably unconstitutional. It's like, but she proposed it. It's out there. She and Biden have proposed this.
Right.
It's taxing unrealized assets. So does that mean? And I heard this today. And I thought it was a great point. If I have a loss, an unrealized loss,
You get a tax
do
write-off?
I get a check from the government? Because that'll be the biggest scam going.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought about that.
So you're going to tax me on my gain. Let's say I have an asset worth $100 and it goes up 25% and I've got, $25 more. What if I lose that? Are you going to give me my money back?
Well, but think about what it would do. It would crush older Americans who have paid off their houses.
It would crush the real estate market. It would crush the equities market. It would crush everything.
I mean, you talk about crushing old people. You take the one thing that is the most valuable, their home, and you're like, oh, you have an unrealized asset right there. You bought that house for $35,000 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It's now worth $1 million. You're going to get taxed on $965,000
Tomorrow.
That's outrageous. That's outrageous. They would have to sell their house to pay the tax.
No. I mean, they'd have to declare bankruptcy. Because for those people, that's all that's their prime asset.
Yeah, right.
They borrow off of it. They live off of it. Many people do.
I mean,
that's crazy.
Imagine if you had done a reverse mortgage and then get stuck with that tax.
Oh,
You're screwed.
Oh, yeah.
You are declaring bankruptcy
Yeah.
at that point. Jeez.
And on top of
That's
that,
the worst policy ever.
After she wants a 45% equities and capital gains tax.
45%?
45% on top of the 25%
What's the point of
asset.
investing if you have to give half of it away?
And raising the corporate tax from 21% to 28%. And by the way, corporations don't pay taxes.
Right.
You do, ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly.
In high unemployment and high inflation, because those are just costs that get passed on.
Exactly.
Which is why one of the other reasons why inflation has not been tamed. We have an inordinate amount of not only do we have money chasing after fewer goods, we have higher taxes and more regulation than we've ever had.
Right. She would be a disaster for the country.
She would be a complete and total disaster.
And so that goes back to why Trump needs to lean in on some of these ideas that Reagan, not only campaigned on,
he
talked
should
about,
lean in
but
on the
actually
Reagan
governed
Revolution.
on. I mean, take the Reagan playbook.
Yeah.
Because guess what? 1980 looks a lot like 2024.
No, I agree with you. I think if he can lean in on the aspirational side, especially when you have China and Russia on the march, and you've got, as you even point out, a hot war in Ukraine, another hot war in Israel that needs to be solved quickly before we devolve into a world war. If he can push into the aspirational aspects of what freedom really is and liberty and individual liberty, and steal and give homage to Reagan in a very small way, because they knew each other.
Yeah.
Tell a story about Reagan.
Right.
You know, the movie's out there for a reason. Lean into it.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that this
And you don't
movie,
have to embrace, the Bush legacy or everybody else who's trying to push on
the
you.
Bush HW took the Reagan legacy and screwed it up.
And blew it up. Yeah.
So what's interesting is that
Although he was there when the wall fell.
Well, right, but that was Reagan's legacy.
And he blew Saddam Hussein back into Iraq,
Right.
but didn't finish the job.
Yeah.
Could avoided a lot of stuff.
The Reagan movie actually has been in the works for many years.
Yeah.
Dennis Quaid was asked to play the role back in 2018.
Yeah.
And so they finally started filming in 2020. And because of COVID, it got slowed down significantly. It's taken a while to get. So this has been a long time coming. And, 40 years now after he won his reelection in 84, 44 years after he won the presidency, 20 years after he passed away, or 20 years after he passed away.
That was one of the saddest days of my life.
Yeah. It's definitely worth seeing. So obviously go see it. It's Dennis Quaid as Ronald Reagan, Penelope Ann Miller as Nancy Reagan. And then you'll see, Frank,
she does a tremendous job.
She does.
Too.
She did it. Both those two did a great job. They're both Emmy.
And whoever the makeup artist is deserves whatever accolades they get, because they in turn really make them look.
They did a great job with
like their subject
with John
matter.
Voight with the being the Russian operative. They did a great job with the guy who played Mikhail Gorbachev.
Yeah.
And they cast
Robert Davi as Brezhnev.
Yeah. A guy named David Henry plays a younger Ronald Reagan when he was lifeguard and in college. I thought he was a dead ringer for Reagan.
Yeah.
And even the young kid who played Reagan as a young boy with Dutch was pretty spot on. So, yeah, the whole thing is great. Definitely worth the time and the effort.
And if you love our country and you love Ronald Reagan, you will shed a tear or two.
Yeah. Well, and you don't even have to have fond memories of Reagan or even be, you may not be old enough to remember Reagan at all, but it's worth watching because you get to see history. This is 8 decades of actual American history that you watch.
Well, and we're going to see it again.
100%.
We're going to see it again.
Well, I'll probably see it like 3 or 4 times before then.
But we have a planned other screening engagement with the Doty Londons.
Yeah.
With Lisa James
Totally
and Kim
gonna miss
Owens,
too.
who invited us to come and tell a little bit about our podcast and actually see the movie again.
So I get to wear
I'm
this
looking
shirt
forward
again.
to it. Yeah, and take your kids. I took my son. He's 13. He knows a little bit about Reagan. I'm kind of crazy about it around the house. I've got at my old office in my old life, I had a whole shelf of Reagan memorabilia, and now what's great about seeing the movie is that he has interest in going to the library, and we're going to go to the USC Notre Dame game over Thanksgiving, and then the next day we're going to go to the library.
Oh, nice.
And kudos to our friends at Young America's Foundation for opening up the doors of the Reagan Ranch in a way that they did, because not a lot of people have seen that place.
And they filmed it there.
And they filmed a good majority of the movie there, and that was great to see.
Yeah.
Thank God they have that sacred place.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
It is amazing because it is just the way it was left.
Yeah, they have not touched anything. I think they have some things they built off to the side.
Right. But the house
they have a great internship program out there too.
Yeah.
A little plug for YAF.
In fact, a good friend of our podcast, Mark Short,
Yeah.
was the head of AF for and out at the Reagan Ranch for a few years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this was great. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah. It was tremendous. Thanks for hosting.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and
So-
thanks to everybody who listens to the podcast who have been our guests who were there.
We had a lot of.
I was looking around the room like, well, he's been on, she's been on, we have to get her on. I talked to a couple people afterwards. I'm like, you need to come on.
Yeah.
It's the season.
It is. It is definitely the season. Well, if you want to be inspired, uplifted, and nostalgic, then certainly go see Reagan.
And certainly if you want to get in touch with the great, founding principles of our country, which is the founding principles of this podcast:
That's right.
faith, freedom, free enterprise, which Ronald Reagan loved so much.
He encapsulated them. Good. All right.
Well, we'll be back to recap whatever has gone on between now and next week after tonight.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
God bless.
Take care.